Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is David Howe. I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Homeowners Association, which is sponsoring this forum. We appreciate your being here very much. We also appreciate the candidates taking time out of their weekend to come and join us as well. I have a little advice for the candidates before we start. The late Senator Sam Ervin from North Carolina, used to like to tell a story about a preacher who had a penchant for using words that he wasn't quite sure of the definition of. And during a visit from a visiting minister who was going to give a sermon, he said, "Now I want you to speak loudly and clearly because the agnostics are terrible in here." Now, let's hope they're not religious agnostics. We may have some political agnostics here, but we should resolve that by the end of the afternoon. Our format today is 90 minutes, and on the screen that you see, we're going to have a list of all of the, I can make this work here, little help, Ray. Well, we'll advance this here shortly. It's going to be a 91-minute seminar today. Well, we're getting that back on. We're going to have a list of topics, beginning with jobs in the economy. We're going to go through health care, taxes, spending, immigration reform, entitlement reform, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for general questions. Now, during each segment, each subject segment, I'll start off with a prepared question. The candidates will have 2 minutes each to answer that question. And then we're going to open the floor for comments or questions please, from the audience. And there'll be 1-minute responses from each candidate. As we move through this, we're going to try to keep each subject area discussion to 12 to 15 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end for general questions. We have a timer, and the only other comment I would make is please keep your questions brief and to the point. We would prefer that you don't make a speech in that process, but if you have remarks that you want to include, go ahead. All right, let's begin. Our candidates today in this runoff are Doug Collins, in alphabetical order, Doug Collins and Martha Zoller. State Representative Doug Collins is in his 3rd term representing the 27th Georgia District in the House. He's a former business owner and now practices law in Gainesville and serves as a chaplain in the United States Air Force Reserves. Martha Zoller is a talk show host. She began her career in 1994, hosting public affairs and conservative talk programs that won multiple awards and recognition. You may have heard her on the air. I understand that the FEC has had something to say about having a radio show while you're running. So she's presently not on the air with her talk show, but she has been seen locally on CNN, Fox News Channel, and MSNBC, as well as national news broadcasts. There's a more complete biography on each candidate on their individual websites. So, with that, we'll begin, and by a flip of the coin, Doug Collins will make a 3-minute opening statement.
I think we're going to have to go in between here. It is good to be back, and it just seems like yesterday we were up here, I think it's back in February, to be a part of this homeowner association, Big Canoe, and really getting this campaign kicked off. And it has just been a joy to run. It's also great almost 10 days ago now when the primary election, I was pleased with the efforts in Pickens County and up in Gilmer in this area that helped us to come in first in the primary, but now we've got a runoff. And so I'm here to ask for your vote again, whether it be an early voting or on August the 21st. We're excited about this opportunity to come again. It's also good to be in this chapel again, where my dear friend Lynn Walker is now serving, and it's good to see him here as well as so many friends. We've got for those who may not know me, I'm from Hall County. I went to school at North Georgia College, have a pastored a church for 11 years, served in the military, still at Dobbins Air Force Base. In fact, had drill last weekend, served in Iraq in 2008, and also have served in the State House for the last 6 years, and also own my own small business and law practice there in Gainesville. But what I'm excited about today is to be here is the news from this morning. For those of us who are running on the Republican Party, the news this morning was exciting. When Paul Ryan was picked to run with Governor Romney as his running mate, I believe we made a strong statement on where we're moving forward in this country. And it really, I think, fits into what we want all over the country, not just here in Northeast Georgia. It makes a statement across the board that we're ready to tackle the tough issues. We're ready to get in and begin to do the work that needs to be done. And that's what I've been doing in my career, and I think that's what we need to continue to do in Washington. And with this pick of Paul Ryan, I think we're going to continue to see that. The issue of cutting the budget, cutting spending, which is what we've done on the state level. In fact, and I use this statistic a great deal, when we look at spending on the state level, we are 9% dollar for dollar less state spending in the last 10 years. 30% if you adjust it for inflation. That's what making smaller government looks like. It means taking out departments, which we have eliminated Department of State Government this past year that I had worked with others in the General Assembly. It also means cutting taxes, which we've done twice over the past 6 years, and you're paying less taxes now than when from 7 years ago when I first entered the legislature. And the budget is smaller, and state jobs are being eliminated and have been significantly decreased by the thousands. But what it also means in this race is that when we go to Washington, we do the same thing. We take those common sense values to Washington and make the budget smaller. We redo our tax system into a fair tax system. We begin to not worry about in taxing those who are being productive. What we want to do is we want to encourage. In fact, that is one of the things that Paul Ryan said this morning. He said it was going to be, we wanted equal opportunities, not outcomes. And what we got to do is remember what the founder said. It's about a pursuit of happiness. That's why I'm running for Congress. I want my children and my grandchildren I haven't seen yet to have that same opportunity. Look forward to answering questions today, but it's good to be back up here, and thank y'all so much for coming out.
And it is good to be back in Pickens County, and gosh, I mean, what a runoff night. We ended up back and forth all throughout the night, ended up about 700 votes, a little more than 700 votes separating Doug and I when it was all said and done. And Roger Fitzpatrick, nobody thought he could get 17% of the vote, but let's give him a round of applause even though he's not here, because he did an amazing thing with a little bit of money. So we are here in this runoff, and I am so proud to be standing here today. I've been your conservative voice here in Northeast Georgia for more than 16 years, but I haven't just been a talker, I've been a doer. I've been building a community, not just a career. I worked for Riches from 1975 until 1990. I started out as a gift wrapper making $2.45 an hour, and I ended up as a buyer managing $10 million a year of other people's money. But I had to turn a profit, and I had to have a return on investment. And went and asked my boss for an investment in my company and in my business. I had to show him how I was going to make that money back. I also then married my husband, who came with 3 little boys that were 3, 5, and 7, and I realized pretty quickly they needed somebody to look out after them. I had been told by a couple of doctors that I couldn't have children, and so I figured that this was just God's way of giving me children. But about 18 months later, after we got married, we had a little daughter, and now we have 4 children. They're between 21, almost 21. I shouldn't get it going too fast there. Almost 21 and 30 years old. My oldest son just turned 30. Now that is a wake-up call when you have a child that's 30 years old. But then I also ran my husband's medical practice for the last 2 decades. I have been in charge of everything from making appointments to making sure the girls are happy. And in a small practice, making sure the girls that work for you are happy is a very important job. But I've also seen what has happened to healthcare in the last 2 decades. And I have been on the front line of you having the government get between your primary care physician and you. I have seen it firsthand. I've had to deal with the insurance companies. I've had to get out there and try to help solve those problems. And I've been a problem solver throughout my career. I've also built a media career where I've seen politicians on and off the record, and I've seen how the sausage is made, even though I haven't made the sausage. But one thing that I think is important about this pick of Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan, as Romney's pick, is a man with a plan. He is a guy that put himself out there. He said, this is my plan, and this is how you're going to hold me accountable. I've done the same thing with the Map for Prosperity. where for the last several months I have been traveling this district, first to talk to you about what you wanted from your next Congresswoman, and then putting this together, putting pen to paper, and putting out what accountability is going to look like, what bold reform is going to look like with cutting taxes, cutting spending, and getting regulation out of the way. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times from a business owner that would say, I'm not going to hire anybody else because I don't know what the rules are. How many jobs are there that we've lost because of that? I'm Martha Zoller. I look forward to answering the questions. Go to marthaforcongress.com, and we're going to be talking a lot over the next hour and a half. Thank you.
Question section this morning will be jobs and the economy, and I'm going to begin with the first 2-minute question, which will be addressed to Martha. Jobs and the economy are campaign mantras for national candidates. In your view, what specific job programs do you favor to bring jobs to Georgia?
Well, we outlined in the Map for Prosperity in the section under Bold Reform what has to happen in order to create jobs. And I would argue that if we do what's good for America, it's going to be good for the 9th District. So we have to first cut spending, which means across the table, across the board, we have to be willing to put things on the table. Education, the EPA, the Energy Department, that's the place to start. But we also need to replace the income tax system with the fair tax. I'm a firm believer in that. But in the short term, we've got to cut spending and we've got to cut regulation. Because if we don't get these regulations out of the way, and you're going to hear me say this almost probably to the answer to almost every question, because regulation is what is strangling this country and keeping job creation. So if we do those things right, then the other things will come along and we'll start creating jobs. I can tell you from those business owners that I've spoken to every single day, that if they just know what the rules are going to be. We've been going on this 2 months and 3 months and continuing resolution for what, 3.5 years? How can you plan a business when you're doing that? If we give our business owners a roadmap for how they are going to be able to create jobs by knowing what the tax codes are, knowing what the regulations are, they'll go out and create the jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. Government needs to get out of the way so that private industry can create jobs.
I think the first thing in that question goes back to the actual way the question was, what government program do you want to bring jobs to Georgia? None. I don't have a government program to bring jobs to Georgia because government programs are not what we need to bring jobs to Georgia. What we've got to look at is the structure of going back to getting a free enterprise system going in. That means that we get out of the way of people who want to go out and be productive. It means that the government, and it's been mentioned regulations and the tax code, and those are important. But it goes back to the real stories that you and many of you can relate to. Right now, our community banking system is becoming more and more in danger, I think, than the spotted owl. Because this administration is taking it out on, I had a friend of mine who works in a bank, they sent more inspectors almost to the bank than they had employees in that bank. Now think about that for a second, ladies and gentlemen. This is a country in which you had a president just a little bit ago say that it was because of government your small businesses are there. How many of you in here who started your own business or opened your own business or worked for a company believe that government was the only reason you were there? I don't think so. And I think that's what we've got to get back to. So it means we've got to start with one, retake the tax system, just start over completely. It's not an issue of saying here, what we can bandage and fix. It's we got to start over completely. Fair tax is that step forward. We need to get that in place so that we have a system in which we're removing the restrictions on business, taking that corporate tax off, getting these taxes out of there so that businesses can thrive. We've got to look at a healthcare system. Right now, the Obamacare is law, and we've got to repeal that. We just got to repeal it, get rid of it, because that is what's killing jobs. That uncertainty has been spoke of. It is when it's coming from where you don't know how much you're going to pay. And in the end, what it was supposed to do was cover people. In the end, it leaves a lot of folks out in a lot of holes and a lot more taxes and costs to you and me. We've got to get out of the way. Government programs are not going to start jobs. They never have. They never will. There's not a government program I would actively pursue to bring jobs to Georgia. It's getting back to the free enterprise system is what will work in Georgia, and we've got to continue to do that.
Thank you. Now, excuse me, we will make an opportunity in each subject area for you to to ask specific questions of the candidates. We have 2 microphones, one for the left side, my left, and one for the right side. If you have a question, would you raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Charles.
You both mentioned regulations as if we should do away with all regulations. Do you believe that? Both of you?
No, I don't believe you should do away with all regulation. I would like to implement the REINS Act, which would get the regulation level back to about a 2006 level, and that's roughly about 50% of the regulations. For example, Obamacare's got 94,000 pages of regulation that have already been written for that. It's too much. Sure, we need a safety net of regulations that are out there, but we're way past the safety net right now. You know, the free enterprise system is extremely important. I've been endorsed by Sarah Palin and Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich, but I'm also very encouraged by my endorsement by Herman Cain. And Herman just announced this week, you may have heard about it, that this next month he's going to spend 30 days in 30 cities, 3 stops a day, with Bernie Marcus and other business leaders to go around the country and re-educate people on what the free market is. It's pretty sad to say we've got to do that, but I'm very excited that he's doing that. It's going to be that kind of private action. While certainly government's got to do its job in getting regulation out of the way and having the right regulations left over, but it's going to take people like you sitting right there, you sitting there, and people like all of us get out there and re-educate folks about what the free market is, because we've got to do that.
I think you got to have common sense. Are there regulations that need to be in place that we have seen that have worked? Yes. But also, when you get into departments, that their whole, we've looked at this in this campaign, when you have the EPA, you have the Energy Department, and you have Commerce Department, one's supposed to be promoting business, the other 2 are working to kill business. I think there's a balance between the 2. A specific example that I've had to deal with in the state level was Lake Lanier and discharges back into Lake Lanier. Now, we have an EPD, a state EPD, that is working in that. But when we were having trouble convincing them for a discharge permit, in other words, back from one of our sewer treatment plants back into Lake Lanier, which would replenish that water, the regulations were asking that the phosphate levels and all be at such a level that there really was not an instrument on the market that could measure those levels. Now, at this point, they just said, well, you can't do it because we can't measure it. That's the kind of problems we're seeing from a federal level and a state level. You've got to have some regulation that is a field. What we've got to have is not have regulation that ends up being something that is just cost us work and cost us jobs.
Thank you. One more question on, yes, on the subject of jobs in the economy.
One of the problems in the job market is we do not have enough skilled workers to meet the needs of industry as it moves forward technically. At the same time, we're decreasing the funding for education in those areas at the local technical schools and so forth. What is your solution to that?
Doug, why don't you start?
I think one of the things that we've had to look at, and overall during a time in which the recession is taking away dollars, one of the greatest stars in the universe in Georgia education is our technical school system. And Ron Jackson, who's a commissioner there and the director, has done a great job at looking not only at how you manage his faculty, manages the schools all over the state, but also providing real workplace needs for those companies who want to come here. And that's one of the things that we've got to encourage and continue. The other issue here is we've got to get back to a system, I believe, from an educational standpoint. My 3 kids are all here today. And, my thought is that some of them, probably 2 of them in particular are going to go to college, 1 may not, or they all may not. Because in the end, it's about doing what I believe the Lord led you to be, and that's being bent. But we've got to provide not only a great college system, in which I believe we have in Georgia and worked on the Hope Scholarship Program to keep that going, but also we've got to be able to encourage those who may not want to go to college, but have that for job skills. Because right now in the state of Georgia, there's folks that are mechanics and others that are making great salaries and great living, are very happy, who would have never wanted to go through a college door. And we've got to provide those opportunities in both areas.
I don't think it's a case necessarily that we're not spending enough money on education. We're spending more money than we've ever spent on education. I don't think we're spending smart. One of the reasons why I don't support the federal Department of Education is because the average school system that gets money from the federal Department of Education get 7% of their money from the department, it takes 25% of their administrative time to get that money. They'd be better off to just not have the federal government involved and have that money to put in different directions. But I agree with you about the training aspect, especially on skilled kind of jobs, and not necessarily four-year college jobs. We all know the biggest increase in income is between high school and college. We have a real problem with what we're doing with boys in this country as far as education. I don't have time to address all of that right now, but only right now in the college system, only 40% male. In historically black colleges, it's only 25%. The numbers are even lower in technical school. We are sending the wrong message to our young men about furthering their education. And again, I don't have time to talk about that in length now, but it's something I've worked on for more than a decade, and we're going to try to solve that problem.
Thank you. One more question in the area of jobs and the economy. All right, in that case, we'll move on. The next subject is health care, and I'll begin by asking the following question to the first 3-minute question to Doug Collins. With the recent Supreme Court ruling that the insurance mandate under the President's health care plan does not violate the Commerce Clause, is there anything about Obamacare that you would recommend keeping or support, or are there any alternatives that you see to taking care of rising health care costs on the one hand and the millions of uninsured on the other?
The Obamacare legislation, I would not support any of my desire to see it repealed, period, start to finish. Because what has happened is in the Obamacare legislation that was just recently upheld, and yes, it is the law of the land now, that's what makes this election so important. Because right now, that legislation in and of itself is killing the economy, it's killing jobs, and it never did what it said it was going to do. It's nowhere close to reducing costs. Even their own estimates of what they thought it was going to reduce are way higher, and it's not going to work. It's not addressing those costs, and it's also not addressing the uninsured. Those that are going to be under this care or maybe have gotten covered, we're going to have a situation in which are going to be even worse, because what it did was basically said to employers, here's your choice. Your private insurance you're providing for or self-insurance that you're providing for your company now, or we'll do a penalty. A company that I spoke with recently said we're paying $8,000 per employee for our self-insurance. The penalty was going to be roughly $2,500. Do the math. What are they going to choose? They're going to throw it back on the government, because in the end, that's a business decision. What we've got to look at here is things that were going on before. Are the issues that were brought up that need to be developed? Yes. Those with pre-existing conditions. That was already being worked on. In fact, our governor, when he was still congressman, was actually working on that through the Medicare pool, where they could take those with pre-existing conditions and put them together so that they could provide insurance or could provide something that would provide their safety net to go back to. That had nothing to do with starting a new program or control. It had to do with using existing funds. When you also look at the providing, I come back to a solution on insurance. I come back to a solution on dealing with this, and that is give people jobs. Instead of just having a government program that says we're going to give you this insurance in which we're going to cover it, we're going to choose, and in the end it's going to cost every one of us more through the taxes that are embedded in Obamacare, then let's work on the economy so that people can have a job and get their own insurance. There's been a part of it that's been talked about saying, well, we'll keep kids on our insurance till they're 26. I would rather have my kids out earning a living and buying their own insurance than having to stay on ours. It's a reflection of society. It's a reflection of where we are, and beginning to believe that government is the solution to our problems. We have the tools in place that we can work on that with insurance and with other things. We can't keep just saying that the government is going to solve this issue.
Thank you. Now, shall I repeat the question?
No, I'm good. A couple of things are true. One, Obamacare was not about health care, it was about control. And number two, we haven't had the free market in health care since 1965. So those that want to go out there and say the free market doesn't work in health care, we haven't had the free market in health care since 1965. There are some things in Obamacare that if President Obama had really wanted a bipartisan movement, Social Security, Medicare, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, welfare reform, all major initiatives over the last 75 years that were all passed with big majorities of Democrats and Republicans. Okay, it was something that people got together on. First time in our history that this size of a change was passed with not one single vote from the other party. And it's because they didn't want to work with the other party. The Doctors Caucus wrote every single week. There are 17 doctors in the Congress, 12 Republicans, 5 Democrats, bipartisan group, wrote to the president's people every week, said, please let us meet with you and tell you about what providers need. Not one meeting was given. This was not about health care, it was about control. If you wanted to have pre-existing conditions, tort reform, being able to buy insurance across state lines, and some kind of pool for the uninsured, those 4 things, you probably could have gotten about a 60% vote. And we would have been far on our way, and we wouldn't have needed $1 trillion to fund it. I personally support Paul Brown's as a replacement. Paul Brown's plan is a plan that unwinds health care from the federal government and actually gets us back to a free market health care solution where you'll be able to have the opportunity to actually seek out your own doctor. My husband, I've worked in his practice for more than 20 years. My husband is a 58-year-old primary care physician. He's the average doctor in Georgia as far as age and years of practice and that kind of thing. He and his colleagues are thinking about how they're going to retire earlier if this goes into play. And do you know who's going to be hurt by that? You and me and all the people that are 50 years old and older. That's who's going to be hurt, because there aren't that many more physician slots in medical school right now. We added 40 a couple of years ago in Georgia, but that was the first time we had added medical slots with all the population growth that we've had in the last number of years. So this is an important issue about access. I believe in Paul Brown's plan, but I also think that there could have been a better opportunity if it was really about getting together and doing the right thing.
Thank you. Now, any brief questions from the audience on the subject of health care? Yes, sir, back here.
Yes, I heard Tom Price on the news the other day talk about he didn't like the Obamacare, but he thought that we could have pools. I've also heard the state legislature reject the idea of the exchanges. I was wondering if you could clarify for us what's the difference between a big pool and a big exchange.
I think what we've got to look at, and what Dr. Price put out a plan that deals with costs, and I like his plan. I like Dr. Brown's plan as well. It deals with with some of the issues that buying insurance across state lines. We passed that in Georgia. Unfortunately, we read about a month or so back in the end of June. Insurance companies hadn't taken up on that because they didn't know what was going to happen at the Supreme Court with Obamacare, and so they just didn't do anything with it. What we've got to look at here is more of what I think Dr. Price was talking about, was more of what hopefully our new vice president was talking about, and that is dealing with issues of how we give tax breaks, that we make and again, if we can get rid of the fair tax, this won't be an issue, but when we get an issue in which we take that out of the individual's issues as far as how their costs are, so we can begin to cut costs, and when they get insurance, it's not something that's burdening their pocketbook, but it's getting them back in a system of private insurance. And that's what Dr. Price is looking at. He also was dealing with the rules and the issues that hospitals have to go through. Dr. Brown's plan dealt with that as well. What we've got to do is we've got to look at ways that we can encourage not only hospitals to not have to do the care, and tort reform is part of that, which I believe in, which we may actually need to get into with dealing with a different style of the way we deal with medical malpractice. So the issue is, I think what he was dealing with was how do we help those get insurance on their own?
I think to answer your question, pools and exchanges are basically the same thing, and I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of murky water there. People don't really understand how they work. People are reticent to get involved. It is true that Georgia, along with many other states, have passed the ability to go across state lines, and people aren't biting. And I'm very surprised about that, but when you dig into it, what you're finding out is they don't know what the rules are going to be in 6 months, and so they're afraid. I had to leave my job on May the 11th, and I worked for Cox Media Company, and I had, they're the old style, old-fashioned health care. I mean, I paid $87 a pay period for health insurance for my entire family. I mean, that was an incredibly cheap cost because they're a privately held company and that kind of thing. When I got my COBRA bill, it was $1,200. for my COBRA bill. And I went out into the private market and I priced out a high deductible plan with major medical for a temporary 6-month period and was able to get that cost down to $300. People need to be able to do that kind of thing themselves. They have got to unwind the government from this and start putting the power back into the people's pockets to be able to pick the plans that work the best for them.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience on the subject of health care? All right, in that case, we'll move forward. The next area we want to talk about is taxes. And my first 3-minute question to Martha: do you support the extension of the so-called Bush tax cuts as they exist today? And if not, would you modify them or eliminate them altogether?
Well, I first take issue with them being called Bush tax cuts. These have been the rates that we've been paying for 12 years and 10 years, depending on when they started. There are people, some of your children, all of my children, these are the only tax rates they've ever paid. So it wasn't a tax cut to them. It was what, when they got out of college and got a job, and if you're up until about your mid-30s, it's the only tax rate you've ever paid. So I take issue with them being called extension of the tax cuts. It is whether you want to give a tax increase to the American people at a time when the economy is bad. And my answer to that is no. We have a spending problem. We do not have a revenue problem. In the Map for Prosperity, we talk about what we do. I like the fair tax, but I don't think we're going to have a fair tax without a president that is supporting the fair tax. So what I support is a plan called Cut, Cap, and Balance, and that means you cut the spending, you cap it at 18% of GDP, and then you balance the budget with a balanced budget amendment. I don't think the American people need to be taxed anymore. I think it's extremely important that we understand that. We've got to look at a different way to do this. This whole ruse about whether we're going to extend the Bush tax cuts or not, that's all it is. Because they're not the Bush tax cuts, they're the rates we've been paying for a decade. Okay, and that's how we've been planning our businesses. And that's what we have to do. So no, I would not support changing them. I'd in fact lower the taxes and get rid of some of the loopholes, follow what Paul Ryan is talking about. That's what I would do. And I think we're going to have a lot of people in Congress that are going to agree with me and that we're going to be able to get some of this stuff passed come next year.
Shall I repeat the question?
The tax code that we have, is right now, if we're not going to address those, those are permanent, they need to be made permanent. There does not need to be an increase at the end of this year. And that's exactly what that would do if there was a change or it just was allowed to sunset out. What we've got, though, in this issue is we've got to look at what are we going to do about taxes. I was sitting down just the other night with a gentleman, and he was as honest as he could be. He looked at me and he says, Doug, he said, we may or may not agree on this. He said, but I believe this year there's no way you can tackle the deficit that we have or the budget problems we have unless you, he said, I'll talk to you about spending. He said, but you're going to have to raise taxes. He said, don't you agree with me? And I said, no way. I said, the problem is we've not looked at it from an ever perspective that most of us in this room look at it. And that is that we don't raise taxes. If we go out, what we've got to do is we've got to, we cut taxes, but we also cut our spending. The first place we have to start here is cutting spending. We've not tackled that. What we'll do is we'll talk about cutting 1% or 2%. We'll look at it long term and say over time we'll fix this, but let's have this revenue enhancement, or we'll do other things, and we don't do that. We never end up cutting the taxes. We never end up getting out of the system we're in. As I said when we first started today, we've got to have a complete overhaul of our tax code. It's not a matter of do we need to patch it, do we need to put a Band-Aid on it, or do anything else. We need to cut taxes. Georgia right now is in a position to grow because we have cut taxes, we've expanded opportunities for business, and that's exactly the kind of stuff we need to do in Washington. We need to cut the level of government. We need to continue to cut spending so that it fits where we are as an economy. Think about how many of us in this room, and some of you may or may not, I know in our family we've had to cut spending. When it comes down, if we don't have the money coming in, we cut spending. We live within our means. That's where you've got to start. It's not about a tax code that we say, let's make this tax code in there and figure out how to spend it. Let's decide exactly what we want from our government. Let's decide what we want our government to look like from a constitutional perspective, from a perspective of what it's supposed to provide. And then we would begin to design our tax code like the fair tax to begin to say, here's what we're going to do to encourage productivity and to get our people moving again in areas in which the economy is depressed and where government, and especially from tax perspective, is just hindering business and business production. The president likes to talk all the time about, and Democrats as well, about taking this $2 trillion or more that's out there that's not being reinvested. But there's no businessman in this building right now, in this chapel, that would do that if they knew that most of it was going to go to taxes. They're not going to do that. We've got to get an environment in which our businesses are able to invest and use the money that they've earned. That's part of the system of called profit and reinvesting in the system. We've got to provide a tax system that will do that.
Now, any questions on the subject of taxes from you? Yes, Bill.
It's a two-part question. First, have you read the Simpson-Bowles report? And assuming you have, would you support it or not? And if not, why not?
I have read it. I support the cuts in it. I do not buy into the attitude you've got to raise taxes and cut at the same time. I think we've got to cut spending first. You know, a lot of people ask me on the campaign trail what I thought about Saxby-Chambliss and the Gang of Six and all that. And the answer to that is it would have been nice to have seen them be able to debate it. You know, the president put this commission together. It came out with the report, and then basically it was deep sixed. Okay, and I would have liked to have seen it debated. There's a lot of things I would like to have seen debated over the last number of years, last 3.5 years. The problem is we've got a system right now where the House is passing things. I don't think most of you knew that the House has passed 30 jobs bills with vote margins of 350 to 400. That's a bipartisan vote margin by anybody's definition, but they're not being taken up in the Senate. So as far as Simpson-Bowles is concerned, my big issue is spending. That we cannot ask for another dollar from the American people until we have shown them we're going to spend the money they're already giving us in a prudent way. We've got to win the trust back of the American people, because right now, I think the reason why T-Splosh was voted down, I think the reason why a lot of things have been voted down is because you don't believe the government when they tell you, as Ronald Reagan said, I'm with the government and I'm here to help. You don't believe that. Okay, so that's the problem that we have here. So I would say, let's start debating these things, get them to a conference committee, and then we can decide. But we can't do it unless we actually discuss it and debate it.
I think, for me, it goes back to the answer I just gave a minute ago. The Simpson-Bowles, yes. It was a report that was brought out, I think, for many different variety of reasons. The problem that I have is that I expressed just a moment ago in my other answer. Is just what was expressed as well, is the spending side of it, the cuts, and then we're never going to get to those, because in reality we're only going to cut this amount here, but we want to enhance the package here. If the package and process was moved forward, if the president was actually serious about trying to implement this instead of just putting it out there as what I began, and I still believe is probably more from the administration's point of view a political game, to say let's talk about it but not maybe do anything about it, then I think we could have actually had a conversation. It could have actually led to tax reform. It could have actually led to us looking at how we do actually generate jobs and make the government smaller, plus make our merry way of life more productivity. The problem is, though, is it was never allowed to move forward, but I don't think it was ever intended to move forward. Because if so, the president would have moved it in different ways. He didn't do that. It would said it just became a game that was put along the side. Others tried to take it up, but in reality, it was not something that was going to move forward. And the reality is they don't want to tackle the spending cuts, but we've got to talk about it so we can get everything on the table.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
We're on the subject of taxes, and Martha just mentions T-Splosh. As I understand it, Martha is this went down to resounding defeat. Martha is resoundingly against that issue that came before us. On the other hand, Doug, you supported it in our state legislature. How can you be a non-spender if you supported such an issue? I'd like both of you to respond to that, please.
Not a problem. I am a strong proponent of taking, when this T-Splost issue came up, is actually putting it on the ballot to give you the choice and looking at your transportation issue. When the vote actually came, your characterization I will take exception with, because several months ago I came out and I voted no on T-Splost, because actually when the list was developed and actually after the process went through that we encouraged through the legislation now, it didn't fit the needs of the district in which I voted in, and that's why I've been against, and that's why I was for it. But I'll also never back away, and in this situation, putting it on the ballot where people can have an opportunity to vote for it. That's what I did. It's a two-part vote. Mine was simply to put it out there, and I joined you and many others in this room in voting no against it.
Well, I'm one of Doug's constituents, and I'm really happy Doug ran for Congress because he was a really great state legislator this year. He really met the needs of the people this year in a way that he hadn't done in a number of years. But on the T-Splost issue, I think that, what Doug saw as he went on the campaign trail was that, people didn't support it. But the one thing that we're dealing with today, and I'm going to take him at his word that he wanted to just put it on the ballot, and then he voted no against. I'm going to take him at his word. I know he's a man of his word. I'm going to take it at his word. But one of the things that's interesting about the whole T-Splost issue is there's this penalty in there. And there were 4 votes taken in the state legislature regarding this. The penalty was in every one of these votes. We're going to be paying for it. Now, I hope the state legislature will take care of that. But again, putting a penalty because you don't vote a tax in that people want seems like a little backwards way to get money from people.
Yes, sir.
On the topic of tax reform, both of you mentioned the fair tax. The qualifier fair carries almost zero information. Could both of you briefly choose one other word to describe the tax reform that you favor? Flat, sales, consumption, value added, some other word to give us an idea of where you're coming from. Fair doesn't really tell us much.
It is, you can go first. Okay. It is the national retail sales tax. It is a consumption-based tax. It would repeal all federal taxes and then replace it with a national retail sales tax. And it is, you can go to fairtax.org and get a lot more information on it. But I believe it's the fairest way to go because we have said that we are a consumption-based economy now. And so it taxes on consumption. It brings a lot of people into the world that aren't paying taxes now. So that's why I support it.
Yeah, for my definition, consumption tax is from a fair tax moving toward a consumption tax. I want to address one quick thing. One, I believe Martha said I was her representative and am still her representative until December in this issue. I think I've represented her real well on all the issues up into this time because Georgia's a great place to live right now. We've lowered taxes, we've cut spending, we've done what we said we'd do. When it comes to the penalty, I've already, in the process of T-Splost, after the definitions and all that have been going, I'm already working with the governor and also working with those to where I believe, in the end, the legislature is going to redo that, repeal those parts, and we're going to move forward and now to the next step of having input. And it brought a lot of people to the table that had never been interested in transportation before. I voted like you against this now, and that's where we need to be. But on a consumption base is where we need to be on our tax system. Consumption-based gets more people involved in the process, and it also begins to get away from this idea of taxing productivity, such as our income tax system does currently.
Thank you very much. Yes, another question.
Where do you each stand on earned income tax credits?
All right, the question is how the candidates stand on the earned income tax question.
I think in dealing with this, whether it's earned income tax credits, whether it's other issues in dealing with, we need to redo the tax system. Instead of just, building this in for those on the lower end and saying at a certain amount, we're going to just write this off whether they're paying or not. We've got to redo the entire tax system. And I know for both of us, you hear us saying this, but going to a consumption base, a fair tax system in which we put everybody back out there on the playing field, we get rid of the IRS, we get rid of these regulations that are killing business. I think at that point, then we don't have, the process that we have to deal with right now in an issue where taxes are killing us, and we've got to get out of this situation in which we're removing that, and even from individuals and from our corporate side as well.
I would eliminate the earned income tax credit. It's another one of those things like the doc fix. I don't know if any of y'all know about that. I know we told the girls in our medical office you need to watch the debate on the doc fix, because the doc fix is going to determine whether you get a raise or not. Because if our fees get cut by 27%, if the doc fix expires, then we're not going to be able to give raises. And why I bring up the doc fix along with that, it's another one of those things where we had these formulas, right? And these formulas were intended to make things fair, okay? And then they never updated the formulas, and then they had unintended consequences down the road. So I would get rid of the earned income tax credit. I certainly want to replace the entire tax code. I want to repeal the 16th Amendment, and I want to get away from income tax to income taxes altogether. I don't think we should tax productivity, but at the same time, we've got to unwind, and I've used this term several times, we've got to unwind these unintended consequences from these kinds of formulas that are actually costing the taxpayers a lot of money.
Thank you. I'm going to use my authority here to move on. And let me also say that if any of the candidates want to rebut any comments by the other candidate, I'll make an opportunity for that as well. Now, spending could just as easily go with taxes because the two are obviously connected. So we'll continue with this discussion. The question is this: with spending, a borrowing of about 40 cents of every dollar that we spend, what specific measures would you support to bring the national budget into balance? And I'll address this to Doug. 3 minutes.
Did the question just sink in as I was moving from my chair to the podium? That question, did it just sink into you? That we're borrowing 40 cents of what we're spending out of the dollar? That right there is just an amazing thought. It's an amazing thought we've come to the position where we're just within just a little bit of time of borrowing more than half of what we're spending. When we look at that specifically, are there ways that we can look at, some of us have been mentioned already, from EPA, education, the energy department, those things on a federal level. It goes back to what we believe and what we want the federal government to look like. And what we want to believe that the state governments can take on, and where that balance is in between. Those are all agencies that can be either eliminated immediately or eliminated in a very short order so that we can begin to look at how we are spending on a federal level. There's also other ways that we can look, and there's other ways that we've got to look, and that is into one specific example is using the transportation department. It was never, I believe, intended to become the behemoth that it's become in Washington. Through the federal gas tax and through the roads that at one point was the Eisenhower Parkway system, it's time to roll that back. It's time to begin to say, let's let our states handle their transportation needs, and especially from a perspective of we're going to have a federal side, let's move that money and block grants back to the states and the state legislatures. This is a way we can make not only two things. One, occur is you get money because Georgia is a donor state. Georgia is a donor. This is one where we're building roads elsewhere because we're giving way to others. But also it begins to shrink the Department of Transportation, which is again another goal that I have of shrinking government, but also making sense in our spending. But then we've also got to look at the other areas of spending, and that is right now, this administration and this Congress seems to be bent on trying to do that on the backs of the military. We can't do that. In fact, our military is getting smaller numerically, but yet being asked to do more. But yet they're all being asked to take a disproportionate share of the cuts. And so we're going to cut this back because we can, quote, do it smarter and faster. But bottom line, as somebody who's in the Air Force, I've yet to see the human element taken out of that. We've got to have those airmen and Marines and sailors and soldiers and Coast Guard folks who actually out there do the job and are standing on the front line. When we look at our spending goal, there's levels we can cut at all areas. We're talking about here in just a few minutes. I don't think all these are entitlements. I paid into Social Security, and many of you have. But I think we've got to look at how we deal with those and the cuts involved there. But we've got to redo those programs so that we can begin to capture savings and begin to reduce the spending levels. This is the big problem we have right now, more than almost as much as anything else in our country. The spending levels and the debt problem that we have got to be erased, or otherwise my kids and my grandkids that I've not seen yet are going to be smothered in something they can't get out of. We've got to address it now.
We've got to reduce the size and scope of government to a constitutional level. I mean, that's, sounds a little corny, but I'm kind of ready for corny. I'm really sick and tired of people saying we've got to grow and grow and grow our our size of government. We've added 200,000 private side federal employees since Obama took office, not the military side. 200,000. You know, and I know that's somebody's job, and if we cut those people out of there, it's going to be, they're going to be out of a job, but they'll find a job in the private sector. There's a perfect example, too, in my husband's medical office, and I know we're going to get to Medicare and Social Security later, but we do everything electronically now. We file electronically, we get paid electronically. The staff at the Medicare has gone up about 25%. I mean, how many people out there have added technology to your businesses and you have fewer people working for you? That doesn't happen in the federal government. Okay, we need to change that. So where do we need to cut spending specifically? We need to, and you can see it in the Map for Prosperity and Bold Reform where we talk about it, but it's the departments we've talked about. But it's everything on the table. I think that if Congress is balancing the budget, they ought to take a 15% pay cut and apply it toward debt reduction. People say, and we have a precedent for that back in the Depression, people say that's not very much money, but it's a start. And then the president has to take a leadership role to say to the cabinet, I want you to present to me budgets that are 10% less or 15% less. They have to do that. So I think the answer to your question is that everything has got to be on the table. And that if I'm doing my job right when you elect me on August the 21st, then you're going to be unhappy sometimes with some of the things I'm going to tell you that I'm going to cut. But we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to communicate about it, and in a few years this country's going to be in a lot better shape.
Thank you. On the subject of spending, questions? Mike?
I don't know how true this is, and you guys probably do. If you serve one term and retire, do you get a retirement right away? And if you do, what is it? And if there is one, would you be willing to stop that ridiculous amount? I keep seeing this on the internet about, the military.
Yeah, I mean, in 1989, if you were vested before 1989, then you had what was called those golden parachute retirements. People like Tom Daschle and Trent Lott, and I'm being equal opportunity here. I picked a Democrat and a Republican. Anybody who was vested before 1989. After 1989, I believe it's 6 years before you're vested into the federal retirement plan, but you also do pay into Social Security. So that is one of those things that go around the internet that is not true. But I got to tell you, I haven't been focused on the benefits in Congress. I've been focused on running and getting elected, but that is certainly something that enough people have asked me to take a look at. It's going to be one of the first things I look at once I get up there.
That is correct. The correct answer. It changed a long time ago. I want to go back to one in our time frame of spending. One of the things is when you deal with spending cuts, is actually being able to make those cuts that matter in a sense of actually cutting something out. And will it be hard on this? And I hear this all the time. Well, if you cut this much, you're going to dump these many people into the private sector. Well, most of the time, I know in my life when I've had to make, I've made, and I've talked to people who've made career change. One of my best friends was a career change that he made when his company went out of business. He started his own company and is far better off than he ever was. I think what we've got to do is we've got to continue to cut departments. And is that going to be like? No. When we cut the State Department in Georgia to cut 40 hard jobs, almost $2.6 million in the budget, it really set off. The folks, especially on the other side of the aisle, said, well, what are you going to tell these people about their job? I said, that it's eliminated. And that's what we've got to continue to end up doing. But that is, the answer to Martha did answer that as far as what was being floated around as far as entitlement.
Thank you. Our time is running short, so we'll move on. And if there are questions that we don't address during these subject area discussions, we'll reserve some time at the end for general questions if they haven't been answered for you. The next subject we're going to talk about is entitlement reform. And I'll address this question to Doug. First, Social Security, according to the pundits, is slipping towards insolvency. Comment specifically on what changes to the system you would recommend, such as extending the retirement age or means testing benefits.
This is an area that is, and I'm going to just take maybe a switch in wording here, but I'm not going to look at Social Security as an entitlement. It's something that's been paid in to, and there's been also folks that say, well, I'm not going to, if you have a certain amount, then we're going to give back. And then if that's going to be the judge on if I have the money that I send back, then I want back what I've already put. It's not something that I have looked at and ever heard. What we've got to look at, though, is Paul Ryan has talked about this a great deal. It's going to be, as we've talked about, looking at how do you save Social Security, how do you look at it for the long term. You talk about a shock to the system. My youngest is in 8th grade right now. I can remember carrying and bringing him home, and now he's sitting back there 13 years old in 8th grade as of Friday. But right now, the system as it exists is a fantasy to him. It might as well be Snow White, because it's not going to exist if it's not fixed. What we can do is look at, whether it be Ryan or there's been others who are out there advocating, is just to take a number, I believe 55 and over, in anything in this room that when you say 55 and over, then you're going to have those benefits. Nothing changes in your program. Now, how do you do that? Well, you've got to make changes to the other end. Maybe have a transition time between a certain age, so that those who are further along have a higher percentage that they pay in, or a mix that they can actually develop on their own. And then younger ones are able to pay a smaller percentage in the system to keep the 55 and over that are currently in there in the plans that are currently in place. But you're giving a choice to them to reinvest or to invest their own money into their own retirement plans. The honest thing right here, though, that we've got to do, and I'm passionate about this, we've got to do this, because if we don't, we're missing the boat, and we're continuing to put ourselves over a financial cliff as far as spending and oblivion. We can't do it, and there's nobody in the end going to be helped with it. But here's the help that we need, is that when myself or others start saying, here's what we got to change, and here's what we're going to keep, and here's how we're going to change it, and if you got it right now, we can make a plan in which you don't lose it, and it stays the same. When you hear others start saying, well, this is changing, and you're throwing grandma off the cliff, then we need everybody to stand up and say, that's not true. That's not what the Ryan plan was. That's not what others and myself are advocating. We're advocating an honest approach to it. It says, how do we fix it long term? How do we fix it for those that are not even anywhere close, but give people more of an investment stake in their retirement program, and it not be a government issue that we've come into now. 55 and over, nothing changed. You begin to look at the other end so that people have an investment in their own retirement plan.
There were a lot of people that were exempted from Social Security initially. There may be teachers in the room that worked for school systems that didn't participate in Social Security. There was an experiment in Galveston, Texas, where none of the city employees participated in it, and they actually are making something like 3 to 4 times what they were making as a working person, because they privately invested in their own retirement. And I have a friend of mine, a good supporter of mine, that's retired from DeKalb County Schools. She makes more money every year than she made as a teacher, because they were never a part of the Social Security system. I like what Marco Rubio had to say about it, and you can go Google his speech, because he's a lot more eloquent than I am, but I'll try to sum it up. But it was at the Reagan Library about a year ago, where basically he said, like Paul Ryan, 55 and older, nothing should be the same. But you gotta have, nothing should be changed, but you gotta have efficiencies there. You can't assume that there's no inefficiencies, and we've got to be willing to say what those are. If you're between 40 and 55, which is where I am, I'll be 53 in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to having a really nice birthday present. But we will be finding out where all this is as far as Social Security, and have partially privatized, okay? And then under 40, I think pretty much we got to tell people they've got to plan for their own retirement. And that's going to be a tough one to bear, but I know that's the way we've raised our children. My husband and I have saved for our retirement as if there will not be Social Security there. And it took a big hit in 2008, like a lot of people did. And we're not sure if we're going to be able to retire when we thought we could. But we have planned our retirement without Social Security, and that's what we told our children to do too. But I think if you're 55 and older, nothing should change. But I just want to quickly tell people how we got here. We got here because in the 40s, they did wage and price freezes. And that was messing with the free market for the first time. And in the 40s, they did wage and price freezes, so they started giving benefits to people. And even though Social Security predated that, they started doing deductions for this and deductions for that, and that was to give you more income without giving you a pay raise. See what happens when you start messing with the free market system? It just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and now we have to teach people what the free market system is. And that's really a sad state of affairs, but I'm up for the fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we open the floor for any questions on the subject of entitlement reform. Yes, sir.
You all both talked about Medicare. That's been done already. What about Medicaid? And I'm sorry, you're talking about Social Security, not Medicare. What about Medicare and Medicaid? How are you going to reform those?
birthday's Thursday, so I think I've got an earlier ask for president after that, coming in early voting in the election. I think, and again, when you take into account the big three, you've got to take Social Security, and then we'll talk about Medicare and Medicaid. Let me take Medicaid first. One of the issues of Medicaid that the Obamacare legislation is sort of passed through, sometimes unnoticed, is the burden that it's going to produce back on the states. What we're looking at right now under the current legislation is why I want to repeal this and why it's going to be such a burden, and why it was, again, a control mechanism that is really designed to bankrupt the system so the government can take over everything and it become really no longer a Medicaid, it just becomes a Medicare, and however you want to word it after that, is we're looking at in Georgia, just in the next few years, adding almost 600,000 plus people, 650,000 people to the Medicaid rolls. That's a congressional district. Now, we just gained a new congressional district in Georgia, so just think about that for just a second, to the addition, at a cost of billions to our budget, which we can't afford. We can't do that. So Georgia is going, if this continues, like states like Georgia, which are fiscally sound, there are other states that can't do it right now. So anything, when you look at that, it's going to have to be changed. Medicare, you got to look at cost, you got to look at the issue of how we cover in our hospital care, and we got to look at dealing with that either through, and also through, and I know Congressman Price's plan, as you had mentioned earlier, that was one of the areas that he wanted to deal with as well, in dealing with our cost containment and our other plans under Medicare. Medicaid needs to be just put back to the state in block grant if we're going to do that, but we got to get rid of Obamacare now that it's officially landed.
Thank you for the question. Medicaid, I believe, needs to be block granted back to the states and needs to be managed on a state level. There also has to be a aspect of personal responsibility in this, where people have got to take better care of themselves. And I know that sounds, I don't like getting up and swimming at 6 o'clock in the morning any more than anybody else does, but I try to do that 3 or 4 times a week and to try to keep everything going and working the right way. But we've got to take some personal responsibility. But as far as Medicare is concerned, that's the big elephant in the room. Roger Fitzpatrick talked about the $100 trillion unfunded mandate. Well, it's there, and most of it is Medicare. And so that we've got to revise Medicare, again, use the same kind of structure. 55 and over, nothing changes except for efficiencies, which really, if Obamacare goes into play, it'll be gutted, and we really have to fix that. 40 to 55, we've got to have a more public-private. And then if you're under 40, then it's got to be something that will maybe be something you'd buy into. You'd be able to keep your insurance. We need to look at a lot of options. I have no problems with stair-stepping up the age. I can't collect Social Security till I'm 67. Why should my Medicare come in place when I'm 65? That would save about $50 billion a year right there. So I think there's some common sense solutions there, but it has to be age, separated out by age group, and then also it has to be looked at as far as what the responsibilities are personally. Hard to do in a minute, but thank you.
To move on and leave time for general questions at the end, I'd like to move on to our last area of the discussion, immigration reform. And let me begin by asking Martha, with the recent Supreme Court ruling concerning Arizona's immigration enforcement, where, in your view, is immigration reform headed?
One of the things I've learned traveling around this district is all the challenges that the ag folks have in dealing with immigration issues. Because when we think about these agriculture folks, it's, you think of them all big farms and lots of employees, but that's not the case. So here's what I think has to happen as far as immigration is concerned. I think we got to enforce the laws or change them. Nathan Deal said that 20 years ago. He also introduced lots of legislation every single year relating to anchor babies and other things. Here's the three-prong approach to what has to be done. Number one, we have to secure the border. This is the best time to do it because of the economy. Not as many people are crossing, and this is the time to secure the border. Number two, we have to fix our visa process because more people overstay their visas than actually cross the border. In our part of the world, we deal more with folks that cross the border illegally. But across the country, more people overstay their visas. And what I think should happen is people who come in on legal visas get driver's licenses in general. You have your driver's license expire the same day as your visa. Then at some point in time, you're going to come in contact with the system, and they're going to see that your visa has expired. And I think that's a common sense, cheap way to be able to do it. And we already have the system in place to do it. The Homeland Security Department and ICE have just not turned it on. We could do this tomorrow. Okay, and then finally, we need a work permit that does not lead to citizenship, but that allows folks to come back and forth to this country to work like we did in the 1940s and 50s, called the Bracero program. That's what we called it back then. We managed 400,000 people coming back and forth to work in this country by hand with no computers in the 40s and early 50s. I think we could do this if we wanted to.
I think the one thing that we need to focus on here is the fact that the ruling in the Arizona case didn't affect Georgia's House Bill 87, which we passed just a couple years ago, last year. When we passed that bill, it was basically saying, here's what we're going to do as far as saying, this is what you need to be a part of the economic system in Georgia, and here's what you're going to do if you hire illegals, because that is part of the source issue of jobs. The Arizona ruling didn't affect that. All of that from Georgia is still applicable, and it really goes back to, and the reason I bring that up is because we were told all the time on House Bill 87, you're being cruel, you're being hard. Here's the bottom line: the federal government has got to enforce the law that's currently on the books. Secure the border. They got to enforce the law that's on the books. And we were saying, well, this is HB 87 was such a harsh bill, Doug. If you go and you compare the elements that were in the original House Bill 87 to the federal code is far tougher than anything we passed. Now think about that a second. Nothing we passed was not already, for the most part, on the books on the federal side, and at a stiffer penalty than what we had. The problem is we got a situation in which we just want to continue to turn the other cheek. We want to handle it as this president and others have said. We don't want to touch it because it might disrupt the political class. It might disrupt votes. Well, folks, our Constitution and our sovereignty are more important than votes. We've got to get a hold of immigration because at this point in time, the fluidity of our borders is causing us not only an issue of economics, but it's causing an issue of national security, in which they're coming through, and we've already had reports from Iran and others in the Middle East who come through Venezuela, who come up through our southern borders, who are here and could be here right now. It's an issue of national security. What do we have to do, though? There's got to be an approach of securing the borders. We did that in Georgia through House Bill 87 as far as saying who we want and how we want that to be here legally. But also on the federal level, I support the Barn Act, which is the Congressman Kingston and Congressman Westmoreland here in Georgia that dealt with the H-2A program, the agriculture that was mentioned just a few minutes ago. We've got to be able to provide that program in which they can get the workers they need, they come and do the job and go home. And that is the part of the process. If they need that help, then they'll have that in a streamlined process where everybody can understand what needs to happen. But also there's another flip side to immigration, which most of the time, and again, even in times like this, we don't have the resources or time to discuss, and that is on the flip side of immigration, and that is those who come here and get advanced degrees and doctorate degrees who are ending up, they can't come because we're so restrictive about the ways, and those who want to come here legally and start businesses and start jobs. Bill Gates has talked about this. Many of our technological companies has talked about this, about not being able to keep employees over here. So what they do is they just send them back to their own countries, start up the businesses there. We've got to look at both ends, not just illegal immigration, but our whole immigration policy and start over.
All right, any questions from the floor on the subject of immigration? All right, in that case, what we'll do is move on to the final segment. We'll leave about 20 minutes for discussion of any other questions you have. We haven't talked at all today about the polarization of the elective process that we've been in. We haven't talked about voter IDs, term limits, gun control, or Chick-fil-A. So we...
You're ready for Chick-fil-A, right?
That's right. Very well. Peach milkshake, you got it. Any general questions on any subject? Yes, sir, up front. Excuse me.
Under the entitlement reform, I know that there has been lots of talk about requiring drug testing to receive welfare. I think that's great. My concern is always the children. Children can't choose their parents. If a parent gets rejected, how are the children going to get fed, get health care, get what the children need?
I'll repeat it for you. And it's basically drug testing for welfare recipients. And I voted on that. I approved it. The governor signed it here in Georgia that if you get those benefits, you're going to have to go through a drug test. And your answer was something that we took into consideration when we looked at that law, is if the benefit was primarily for the children, but it was coming through the parent, there was a process set up in the law in which that could be arranged through either through the defects of the court so that the children could get their money. It could be set aside for them, but the one who was buying the drugs and using the drugs would be taken out of the system. It goes back to a very simple, that was always in the consideration if they need to be, but we didn't want those who were just simply taking, literally, food out of the mouths of babes to go buy drugs with. And that's where that process comes from. That's what was implemented in that law.
And the children are taken care of.
Yes.
And I do support what they did in the state legislature on that, because they did take into consideration that issue, which is an important one. And I think the closer you can get these services to where they're being provided, the better off you are. That's why I support so many federal regulations being eliminated. How can a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. know what you need to provide services in Georgia or Alabama or California? It's different in every place. I think have a very broad set of regulations as far as what are the limits, whether it's poverty levels or something like that. But I think you ought to allow states to deal with this because they're closer to the people. What we've done is made this system very impersonal. You know, this isn't supposed to be a lifetime system. This is supposed to be something that you get temporary help. I don't think any of us mind a safety net, but with 100 million people on government assistance, it's a lot more than a safety net in these days. You know, we had a young woman that was a patient of ours about 20 years ago, 18 years ago. Her husband left her. She had 2 little children. She went on government assistance while she went back to school and got an LPN at a technical college. She was on government assistance for about 8-10 months, that's all. Then she went back, got a job, was able to go on and support her children. Our first programs were called Aid to Widows and Children. The idea was that if someone didn't have a father in the home, they needed somebody to help. Now we have a system that discourages fathers from being in the home. And that's just, think about that for a minute. That will tell a married couple, get divorced, because then your wife will be a single mother and she can get full benefits. What's wrong with a system like that? So I think we need to unwind the federal government from this and allow the states to handle most of these problems.
Thank you. Next question. I saw a hand. Charles, yes.
I wonder if you agree with me that part of the log jam that we see in Washington now, presuming that one of you would go serve there, has to do with the fact that we really almost have a 3-party system. We have the Tea Party, we have the Republicans, and we have the Democrats. And classifying the Tea Party people as Republicans, it doesn't quite fit. How do you stand on the Tea Party? Are you a Tea Party candidate or not?
Martha, why don't you start?
Well, I've been involved with the Tea Party from the beginning. Jack Kingston said I was Tea Party before they called it Tea Party, but I'm a conservative Republican who believes there is a place for the Tea Party within the Republican Party. I don't see it as a separate party. I see it as a movement, not unlike the Boll Weevils were back in the 50s and 60s. Those were conservative Democrats that actually, kind of was a caucus you had to go to get things done. And, for the last 10 or 15 years, we lost that because most of the conservative Democrats became Republicans. And so there was no go-to group that was the group you needed to get legislation passed. So I don't know. We're so new in this movement that I'm not quite sure how it's all going to play out. But I think, in general, it's a positive thing because these are constitutional, fiscally conservative people that are going to try to get things done. So yeah, I'm proud. I've stood in front of small groups, large groups, everything in between. I've ridden on buses. I've carried placards. I have lobbied in Congress. So unpaid lobbying in Congress. I went from door to door to try to get appointments. So I look forward to being a part of the Tea Party caucus when elected. But yeah, I think it's a positive thing.
I think the key term here is conservative, especially on the state level. When we deal with Tea Party, I think the values that many, maybe in this room and others who have brought in have come from the Tea Party perspective, have brought a new, fresh voice to this fiscal conservatism and the social issues that we have dealt with. I think what we've got to look at is it's still within the Republican Party. I think it just is growing in our Republican Party in this sense of just being upset. and being mad at where our government is headed, and being upset in the fact that our government is spending us right now into oblivion, that we have a system of regulations and other things that are killing us in our business, and taking away from the promise of our kids in the future. What we've got to do is continue to look at it, and it goes back to a question earlier concerning, whether it was the welfare benefits. It goes back to a dependency generation. I think one of the things that the conservative voice, Tea Party movement has brought forward is this idea that we've got to be able to stand on our own and also be able to give each person in this room the ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and be a part of who this society, again, without government intrusion.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, sir.
While it might be a pipe dream and never happen, but what is each of your feelings on term limits?
I like pipe dreams. I mean, I think that if we don't aim high, what are you gonna get? I mean, any of you all have been in business, you didn't start out saying, well, maybe I'll just, get part of what I want. So I don't think that's it. Yes, I support term limits. I believe that it ought to be 12 years total. And while there are certainly always exceptions to people that have done great jobs that you might want to stay forever, nobody is irreplaceable. I don't know if y'all followed the news yesterday, but the Honey Badger was thrown off the LSU football team yesterday. Did y'all hear that? And Isaiah Crowell was thrown off the UGA football team. Nobody is irreplaceable. And it's very important that we keep new people going through this system and bringing new ideas, because we're all going to be fine. If I'm up there however many years I'm going to be up there under 12, I'm going to be fine afterwards. I'm going to bring back what I've learned. But I think what you have said as I have traveled around this district is you want term limits. And so I support term limits.
I support a constitutional amendment that would bring back term limits, put it back to the states. If we want to amend the Constitution to have term limits, then I'm all for that. As I stood on that stage, one thing that I've said over time, I'm consistent. And I've been consistent my whole public life, and I'm not going to change anything that I said here in February. I believe that elections work. I believe that what we've got in the state of Georgia is an 80% turnover in the Georgia House and Georgia Senate. In Washington, we have over 60% turnover. And yes, what I think is every 2 years, and what happened this year was another election cycle, in which we had, in the state of Georgia, we had incumbents defeated, we had new people come on board, and in Georgia, you're probably going to have about another 30, 40%, even higher turnover in our system. I'll support a constitutional amendment for that, but also from being in government and looking at it, and we've talked about this before, I think when you look at that, you begin to take the power, when you start limiting the terms, and if we want to do that as a country, that's great, but when you start limiting the terms of those who are elected and answerable to you, then those who work in the offices and those who work in the departments become the most powerful people there. They become the ones that stay. They're becomes the ones that are not accountable to you. They may move between offices, but they're not accountable to you. The elections still work. I believe that. Would I support a term limit amendment? Yes.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like both of you folks to address Grover Norquist. What's your opinion of this no new tax pledge? Have you signed it? Would you sign it if you're asked to sign it? And if not, why not?
The no new tax pledge, I have signed it, and I think what it does, it goes back to what we've spent almost an hour and 20 minutes talking about, is that the issue is not our revenue problem in this country, our issue is our spending problem. So I think what it just highlights is what we've done on the state level is cutting taxes. What we've done, I think, on the federal level is not a matter of raising taxes. It's not a matter of our revenue. It's a matter of spending, and that's where we've got to start first.
I have signed the pledge. I was a signer of the pledge long before I was a candidate. I believe in the process that we don't have a tax problem. We have a spending problem. That's why I've signed the pledge, and I'm a proud signer of it.
Jack?
Well, thank you very much for the presentation that you've both given, and I think it's answered. We've had a chance to ask a lot of questions and get a lot of answers. I didn't see a great deal of difference in the answers. It seemed like there was continuity and agreement. What I didn't hear, though, is, since this is a 9th Congressional District Republican runoff, why I should vote for one of you or the other.
Sure. been working in this region for more than 16 years, and I've been working in my community for a lifetime, volunteering on things. I've been a small business person as well as a big business person. I have raised a family, and I've built a media career. And I think that uniquely equips me for being able to go up to Washington and to shake up the status quo. On the primary day, 60% of the people voted against the status quo. And I think that it's important that we go up to Washington and we say, why are we doing it this way? I'm proud to be endorsed by grassroots leaders in every county that we brought on board in October that have been helping to move this message forward. But I also have been endorsed by Sarah Palin and Herman Cain and Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich. I have had Susan B. Anthony, Liz George, Right to Life. The list goes on, but it's a pretty wide group of conservatives. And I think that they believe that I'm the person that can do what I've done in my business life, which is get impossible things done. And that's what I want to go to Washington for, to go up there and get impossible things done. And I've got a plan, the map for prosperity. I'm the only person in this race that has a plan that you can hold me accountable. And I hope you'll go to MarthaForCongress.com and be involved. I want your vote because we need to change things. We need people that are going to go up there and say, why are we doing it this way? Okay, and make the real changes that are necessary to get this country back on course.
I think the real difference in this is something that really started out. If you want someone who is a proven track record of going not only in talking about going up and shaking things up, I've already been to state level and did that. I took on a corrupt speaker. My first year down there, we had a corrupt speaker who wanted to do things his own way. I stood up to him, was punished for that. About a year and a half later, we helped get a new speaker in house. I've already stood up to what it means to go along with the system or say, are you going to be your own person? I've already done that. I have a consistent record of cutting taxes, of putting better regulatory environment, of getting government out of the way in the state of Georgia, of eliminating a state department, of passing legislation that worked with to drug test welfare recipients. But also have a consistent record on a number of issues. The NRA's endorsed me on my stand on the Second Amendment. I have a consistent record on abortion. I will stand for life, and I will stand for life from the moment of conception till natural death. That's something that is different in this race. I stand against civil unions. I am not in favor of civil unions, and that is a difference in this race. When you begin to look at this, you want to know what you can look at. I don't have a 6 pieces of folder that tells you here's a plan. I've been giving my plan in my daily life for the last 25, 30 years of my life, and the last 6 years when you take elected office. Of standing in the military, of going to Iraq, of saying this is somebody you can believe in, this is somebody you can trust. That's the differences in this race. That is the overall, and that's why I believe I'm the best one to go to Washington and to serve this area, because I hold those traditional Northeast Georgia values, and I have a proven record of already standing up and doing what I've already said I will do.
Yes, sir. One last question.
I want to go back to the subject of term limits, balanced budget amendment. The only way we can amend our Constitution are two ways, either initiated through the House or by a called Constitutional Convention. These matters have not come, they've come before the House. It's never been released from the House to go forward to a vote with regard to any constitutional convention that makes, or excuse me, any amendment to the Constitution, because it's not favorable to the representatives themselves. What can you do? And we know the problems with called constitutional conventions. How do we resolve this? How do we get these amendments? How do we get these changes made, given the way our Constitution is currently written, and these being the only two vehicles to accomplish amendment?
I would agree with you, and in this a certain sense of a called constitutional convention, that is one way to do it. And I believe if there continues to be an outcry, that may be, especially from a balanced budget amendment side, which I would support, and the term limits, which I'd already said, if we want to amend the Constitution to do that. I think it goes back to working together, though. It goes to being able to work together, because there is a rising swell of these issues in our country, especially when we deal with balanced budget amendments and other things that people want. When we work together, we begin to move the process forward. The House is getting closer and closer to having, we've talked about conservative leadership that can come to get the 218 votes necessary. I've talked about this from one of my first speeches that I gave in running, was 218, 60, and 1. 218 people in the House, 60 in the Senate, and the President. We've got to be able to get those numbers so that we can move these things forward. As it said earlier, is this a pipe dream? No. I believe it actually can work, and I believe those are the ways that we need to work. It needs to go through Congress. There are other issues with the Constitutional Convention, but those are things that people just like you in this room have been calling for as we move forward, especially when we can't move it. I would support a balanced budget amendment. In either way, it would come up, but I think it's going to come forward from you and others coming together saying we want to see this happen.
As frustrating as it is, I'm glad that the Constitution is hard to amend. You know, our Georgia Constitution has something like 1,500 amendments to it, and really, how can you have a document with 1,500 amendments? And that's fine. That's fine for the state. But our federal Constitution is more difficult to amend, and I'm happy about that. But I think it's going to happen from putting the right people in the House of Representatives. There's no doubt about that, and I am that person that's going to fight for this. But also it could come from the states. But I'm going to work every avenue to be able to make sure that happens. I just want to address a couple of things that Doug said. I mean, he implied that I was not pro-life. I am pro-life. I do believe in an exception for life of the mother, but I have been endorsed by Susan B. Anthony List and Georgia Right to Life. And Georgia Right to Life reaffirmed their endorsement of me and said that I am pro-life and that they have looked at my record. I also do not support civil unions. And Sarah Palin and Rick Santorum and others do not support people who support civil unions. So I just wanted to clear that up. I'll be around to take any questions that you might have, and I certainly want to answer anything that's happening.
Yes, sir.
I just, I need to address that since she brought it up. And I think that when I brought it, she responded. I want to make the response. Here it is. The record for Martha is what she said. And what she said about is she wanted to keep abortion legal. She said that even in this campaign during forums, and she's used the life of the mother exception to say that's why she wants to keep it legal. That's the pre-Roe versus Wade argument. Even before Roe v. Wade, the life of the mother was always considered in these times. That's a consideration that I just don't have. I don't want to see it maintained being legal. I want to see it outlawed. And as far as civil unions, even our own campaign put out a comment that said after the marriage amendments passed, then I would not be concerned about what others would do with their private contracts. That's a civil union. That's why I said it. That's why we documented it. And that's why we backed it up. And that's why I said it today. And I believe there is a true choice here. This is not an issue that you can look at. You can look at from what we said and how we go about it. But this is a conservative issue. I'm the conservative candidate that is running in this district.
One more comment? I think Doug believes what he says. But if you take a look at the people that have looked at my record and have looked at it objectively, news organizations and others, they have said that he is misleading people with what he's saying about me. So that's fine. You all can decide. But you guys have known me. I have been around. This is not the first time I've been in this county, and I will continue to be around and answer any of your questions.
I wasn't sure that the conversation would freshen like this at the very end of our discussion, but we have had our time. I'd like to ask the candidates one more time if there's anything in 2 minutes that they'd like to say in conclusion. And Martha, you may go first.
I want to thank you all for coming out here today. I see many of the same faces that I saw in January. If you were here in January or February when we were here, raise your hand, just so I know. You guys are involved and engaged, and I thank you very much for doing that. I'm going to be a representative for all the people, and I'm going to listen and discuss issues, and I'm going to be somebody that's going to be out there that you can trust, just like you always have been able to. I have a map for prosperity. And I have been out there, and this has been something, every place I go, people have been coming up, let me see the map. I love the fact that I can hold this in my hand, and I know what you stand for. And then I can give you hell about it if you don't, if I can say that in a chuckle, can give you hell about it if you don't do it. My cell phone number is 770-503-6738. I've got a card in my pocket where I will give you that card so you can call me and ask me any question. I've been a person that has never run from controversy, and I never will run from controversy. And I have the kind of toughness that they're going to need in Washington, D.C. I humbly ask for your vote on August the 21st. Early voting has already started, so I hope that you will early vote. But I'm going to stay around for as long as you have questions, and I appreciate y'all very much. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to be back again, and it is good to be here and talking about these issues. And I think sometimes when you say, well, it gets livened up and freshened up, it just goes back to the heart that this is an important seat. And there are differences. And I've outlined those differences in the records that I just did just a few minutes ago. And you can check that out on our website, collinsleads.com. You can go look at what we said, because I believe this matters. I wouldn't have got in this race if I didn't believe we're at a crossroads. And I am passionate about it because I believe we can't keep on the same path. And you've got to have someone who's been there, who has fought against the corruption of the system, who has fought for real change, and who has authored legislation that has done that, but also taken into account a culmination of life experience. Whether it was pastoring in a chapel like this, whether it was being in the military and currently serving, and being in Iraq and seeing what our troops are going through, those that are on the front line of freedom's sword. When we understand that, then we understand why this is an important election and why two of us have given up most of a year to come talk to you about it. But I'm here because I believe I'm the choice to send to Washington. I believe my record speaks for itself. I believe you can look at that record and you know where I'm coming from and where I'm going to. And that's why I ask for your vote. Right now through early voting, or on August the 21st, I want to be your next congressman. And that's why we're here, to answer these questions, to talk, to why my family's carried around, and why we're here today. Thank you so much for being a part of the system. You'll be amazed at how many times we go through these, and we've done a lot of these forums, and there'll be 15, 20 in the room. But every time we come here, there's a lot of people in the room, and it tells me you care. And I'm thankful for that, because I believe our best days are ahead of us. I believe this country's best days are ahead of us, and we've got to be a part of that. And the only way we can do that is to get involved and to move this country toward the conservative values that I believe are found in Northeast Georgia. So again, thank you for being here today. I look forward to seeing you afterwards. And again, you go to collinsleads.com, and I look forward to and hope to earn your vote again on early voting or on August the 21st. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. And we thank both the candidates for the time that you've given us today very much. They will be, as they said, they will be here for a few minutes after we conclude. If you have any questions you'd like to address individually, they'll be ready to answer. And please remember that they very much need your vote on August 21st. Thank you very much for your participation today, and we wish you a good weekend.